The wind had scraped the plains clean by the time the hunters reached the low rise above Adobe Walls. Dust blew across the hardpan in thin sheets that hissed against their boots, and the sun beat down without a cloud to soften it. In the distance, the burnt-out ruins of the old trading post sat crooked against the horizon, nothing more than a handful of crumbling adobe walls and scattered timber. They had come looking for strays from a buffalo herd they'd been trailing. But as they crossed the rise, one of the men stopped and raised a hand. Something pale lay stretched beside a fallen cottonwood limb. At first, it looked like the bleached trunk of an old tree, but when they moved closer, the shape sharpened into ribs, a spine, and the curved outline of a skull. The body had long since dried and fallen away, leaving a skeleton half buried in dust and prairie grass. What made them stop was the rifle. A heavy Sharps .50-90 lay across the bones, stock resting against the ground as if the man had fallen backward while reloading. The long barrel pointed toward the open plains, the way a hunter might hold it if he were waiting on something that never stopped coming. A few feet away, the earth was torn with shallow divots, spent cartridges, maybe a scuffle, maybe the marks of someone crawling backward inch by inch. Whatever had happened here had happened alone. No camp, no horse, no markers left by friends, just one man, his rifle, and the silence of the high plains. The hunters gathered around, their boots sinking into dry soil as they scanned the empty horizon. The Panhandle had always been dangerous country. Buffalo hunters pushed deeper each season, following herds into lands fiercely defended by Comanche and Kiowa warriors. Adobe Walls itself had been the site of a bloody battle only a few months earlier, when a coalition of fighters charged the settlement at dawn in one of the last great attempts to push hunters out. The gunfire from that fight had echoed for miles. Men still talked about the shot Billy Dixon made with a Sharps rifle that hit a rider nearly a mile away, and yet, standing over the skeleton, the hunters knew this man's death hadn't been part of that battle. The adobe ruins were too far, and the body too recent to be a leftover from that chaotic morning. This man had fallen after the fight, long after the survivors had left the trading post behind. They crouched near the bones, noticing details the way plainsmen do. The rifle's hammer was back. The chamber was empty. A single spent casing lay inches from where the man's right hand would have been. A torn leather pouch lay cracked in the dust, still holding a few paper cartridges that had dried into hard cylinders. His boots were gone, likely in the jaws of scavengers. The remaining scraps of clothing had bleached into unidentifiable fibers. But the angle of the bones told a clear story. He had been sitting, back braced against the fallen limb, legs stretched before him. He had stayed upright long enough for his body to stiffen, and the wind had finished the rest. The hunters looked out across the plains, trying to imagine the final hours of whoever he had been. A buffalo hunter, most likely. The Sharps told them that that rifle was the tool of men who lived miles from help, men who skinned hides under the sun and slept with their boots on because they never knew what the night would bring. Hunters worked in small groups, but sometimes men split off to trail a wounded bull or check distant blinds. If something went wrong, a twisted ankle, a wounded horse, or a sudden attack, there was nowhere to run. One of the hunters picked up the Sharps, brushing grit from the stock. The wood was cracked, but the bore was clean enough that it had likely fired until the end. He set it gently back across the bones. They followed the faint marks leading away from the skeleton, walking 20, then 30 yards out. Hoofprints, old, baked into the soil but still readable, circled in from the north. The pattern was unmistakable, several horses moving fast, tightening around a single point. There were deeper impressions in two spots, as if riders had dismounted briefly. They found no spent arrows, no shells, nothing to confirm the exact moment the man fell. The wind erased stories quickly on the plains. But the hunters knew the general shape of what had happened. A lone hunter, separated from his partners, had been caught out on open ground. There was no cover here, no trees high enough to hide beneath, no rocks to shelter behind. He had likely seen the riders cresting the rise before they saw him. Maybe he fired a warning shot. Maybe he ran. Maybe he tried to circle back toward Adobe Walls. Whatever choice he made, the end had come here, beside this fallen cottonwood limb where he'd taken his last stand. They returned to the skeleton. One man knelt and studied the skull. A small, round hole pierced the bone above the left eye. The exit on the far side was wider, a sign of a heavy-caliber round fired from a distance. It was a clean shot, likely the one that ended everything. But the cartridges scattered around him suggested he hadn't gone quietly. They counted 8. 8 times he'd fired that sharps, dropping cartridges as he worked the lever and fought back against whoever was closing in. 8 shots meant he'd refused to surrender until the moment he couldn't lift his rifle anymore. The hunters talked quietly among themselves. No one recognized the remains. The man might have been from Kansas, or Dodge, or further north. He might have crossed the plains with a partner who died earlier. In the buffalo trade, men drifted from outfit to outfit, making them nearly anonymous. Some never gave their full names. Others used aliases to hide debts or past trouble. What mattered out here wasn't who you were, but whether you could shoot straight, keep your gear dry, and ride with men who trusted you. A gust of wind pushed dust across the bones, and the hunters knew the plains would reclaim him entirely if they left him where he lay. They gathered what little remained, scraps of cloth, the broken pouch, the empty hulls, and dug a shallow grave a few yards from the cottonwood limb. It wasn't much, but it was more than many men found on this frontier. They laid the bones to rest and covered the mound with stones to keep scavengers away. The Sharp's rifle remained beside him, tucked under the rocks, so future riders wouldn't mistake it for abandoned gear. When they finished, the men stood quietly, hats low, listening to the endless wind. They didn't know his name, where he came from, or who might be waiting for him somewhere far to the east. But they knew one truth. Whoever he had been, he had fought until his final breath, alone on the open plains, with nothing between him and the horizon but courage and a rifle that had served him to the end. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.